lest he become blind.
Wow.
May not touch his ears, lest he become deaf. May not touch his nose, what are we going to do for this one? Lest he contract bad smells. May not touch his mouth, lest he become mute and have bad breath. Touch his genitalia areas. And likewise, any orifices of the body may not be touched, such as a wound. A person has a wound, growing a little scab. Not to touch the wound prior to washing hands.
Who says this? Sorry.
This is first recorded in the Gemara in Shabbos 108b, later recorded in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch in chapter 4. This is a ruling binding on all Jewry. There's no Sephardi or Ashkenazi customs here. This is for all Jewry to follow. Again, due to danger. Now, what is exactly the danger? Not that anyone should try, but I'm sure there have been people who are still able to see and have touched their eyes without washing their hands.
Oh,
I'm sure there are people who are still able to hear and have touched their ears without washing their hands. So, some write that this, the Seilus Blula was a Paisik from about 300-400 years back, writes that this doesn't refer to a physical impairment, a physical blindness or physical death, but more spiritual. That, again, this is inside of our body, we have spiritual counterparts. So the spiritual Bas Melech found in our fingers when it touches the ear, it now the spiritual aspect found in the ear now contracts that. So whatever spiritual aspect of hearing that we have can then become effective. As the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek once said to his apprentice regarding a different issue, but in the same context of, Ruach Ra, these impurities, is something that he wasn't supposed to do, which he did. It says you're not supposed to do something because it brings about the Ruach Ra, bad spirit. And he told the Tzemach Tzedek, I'm not worried about those things. I'll, bring it on. I'm ready for a fight with the bad spirit. I'm not scared of it. I'm not scared of monsters. This is what he told the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek told him back, fool, you think that it's some monster that comes and creeps on you in the middle of the night that you can fight. This is an evil spirit that causes you not to want to daven and learn for 3 days and 3 nights. So it's spiritual. It's not something necessarily that causes a physical impairment, but obviously it could also, Pastor Shalom, have a physical effect. So this is something we're very, very careful in. But nonetheless, from the listing that's brought down, that's recorded, we understand that it is permitted to touch any of the other places of the body that are not orifices. So a person can scratch his arm. There's no issue scratching your arm before you wash hands. That is not under any restriction. A person may pick up a child, a baby, to nurse and feed the child before washing hands because there is no tumah being contracted to the child.
But you just don't want to touch
the
the baby's orifices.
Right, you don't want to touch the mouth.
100%.
Oh, so it's not just yours, it's the baby's mouth or anything.
Yeah, 100%. Without touching her mouth, the baby's mouth, without touching the orifices of any human being. But if it's just skin to skin of other places, there's no problem whatsoever.
It seems like being tricky.
It is tricky.
I don't know, but I would think it would.
It is tricky.
Just wash your hands.
Yeah.
Right,
It just makes things easier.
Right. That was the conclusion that I came. Unless I was half asleep and then I didn't know what I was doing anyhow.
Okay, our next set of restrictions, not to touch the washing water. Okay, water or food really, if it gets touched, it becomes impure, contracts this impurity. This is also a Talmudic warning not to do. Recorded in Shulchan Aruch, it's Sephardim and Ashkenazim equally, that we're not allowed to touch any food or liquid before we wash it. If a person accidentally, while he's trying to wash, his pinky or any other finger of his entered the washing water, then that washing water now becomes impure, and he has to get rid of it. So here we have a difference between the laws of washing for bread, or even the laws of preparing the washing water at night, and the laws in the morning. When washing for bread, if I by mistake my finger passed the water that's now fully sitting inside this full vessel, continue washing. If at night when I'm setting up the water, my finger touched the water, not a problem. You don't have the impurity yet. But as soon as we wake up and the impurity of Bas Melech is there, it's waiting for something to now escape to. It's in the fingers. It knows the godly soul that's here wants to escape. So if it touches the water, it's going to spread to the water as well. And that
Then you're
water
sort of
becomes
screwed. You're
impure.
sort of like, well, I can't walk to refill it.
That's you get to call in sick. You could stay in bed the whole day.
That's for someone come and change it.
You know, but it doesn't work so often. What, a week in a row you touch the water? I mean, come on.
So I have a question. I've done it several times. I've touched my kumkum before I wash my hands. Like ready to fill it up
So
because I was so
touching-
excited to drink my coffee.
Well, yeah, drinking coffee is very exciting in the morning.
So does that
I
mean my
definitely agree with
kumkum
that.
needs
Now,
to
did
be
not
total?
everybody hold that you have to wash Nugget Buster by
So
your bed?
we will get to those details of A, washing near your bed, or B, touching a kumkum. Notice how a kumkum is not an orifice of your body,
Okay.
and it's also not food or drink. It's a
Candy.
vessel that holds food or
Like
drink.
about your telephone.
So we haven't yet touched upon that. No pun intended. Okay, that's the Talmudic
You can't
stringencies.
possibly be Makabel Tuma.
According to the Talmud, it's not such a big deal. Just two things don't do. Don't touch orifices and don't touch food and drink. Comes along the Zohar and says the impurity that the Talmud discusses is a lot more powerful than we think. It doesn't just escape towards food and drink and orifices of the body. It can actually escape to many other things that have to be avoided from being touched prior to washing. So what does it say? So it adds the following. It adds, and this is recorded in the Paiskim, the Alter Rebbe records it in the Shulchan Aruch.
Sorry, Rabbi, this now is from Shulchan Aruch.
No, this is
Well,
from the Zohar.
these are the Zoharic restrictions, which are recorded in the Shulchan Aruch as Zoharic restrictions. Now, how obligatory are they? If they're not Talmudic, that we'll get to afterwards. After we go through them, we'll see. Okay, do we have to follow these restrictions? I don't do Zohar. I do Talmud. I don't do the Zoharic stuff. If somebody wants to say that, even though I think that if anyone has an opinion to voice on impurity, it should be the Zohar. I mean, Kabbalah. Regarding this stuff, we understand a little deeper how these things worked. But nonetheless, we'll leave the final conclusion to the end. What does the Zohar add? The Zohar adds, number one, not to touch clothing. So clothing is also not allowed to be touched before you go ahead and wash. So this would be, according to the Zohar, a reason not to pick up that nursing child, because the nursing child is most likely wearing clothing, or we can say that this only applies to clothing that one isn't wearing. That is not clear. If it's clothing that you're not wearing, there is a lot of logic to say it's only to clothing that you're not wearing. Nonetheless, the idea of clothing in general, that's a Zohar restriction, not to touch clothing before you wash. Another restriction of the Zohar that's brought down is not to walk 4 cubits before you wash. The whole idea of washing next to your bed is a stringency, a chumrah, based on this Zoharic statement, which says you're also not allowed to walk. The reason why he says it is the Alter Rebbe writes, he writes the following. In a moment.
How much is 4 cubits about?
Okay, that's a great question. That's a very important question. 192 centimeters. 6 feet and 4 inches.
4 inches. 4 inches.
6 feet and 4 inches. Not 4 inches, 6 feet and 4 inches.
6 meters.
No, 6 feet.
6 feet, 4 inches.
You may
Convert that for you?
3 meters.
You need a washing stick.
No, 2
I don't
meters.
know. I don't know the
2
conversion.
meters. Yeah, 2 meters.
It doesn't matter, I mean,
Okay, so the Zohar.
If the shissel got, you know, is
Can we
on
proceed?
the
Yeah,
bed,
let's continue.
sink first. Oh, good.
The Alter Rebbe who quotes the Zohar, which, by the way, in the Zohar itself, it's a little obscure as to exactly where in the Zohar this is found. But nonetheless, there he writes that according to the Zohar, the reason why you're not allowed to walk 4 cubits is because a person wakes up, starts his day to serve God, start another day of his mission in this world that God sent him down here for. And it's improper for one to walk around carrying this impure spirit when he should be readying himself to serve his Creator. Furthermore, says the Alter Rebbe, quoting the Zohar, that doing so, walking around and going about your dealings without getting rid of it right away, makes one liable for death. Very strict words, which is not no blame to the Alter Rebbe for that curse. So is written into Yaakov, which was a commentary,
Well, it
Kabbalah
probably
Sefer commentary on the Zohar.
death is in Rishayim are considered dead.
Or maybe it could be spiritual death too.
Right.
We're talking about
Exactly.
He says the
Spiritual
reason is
death.
through
Yeah.
residing this impurity on his hands, he has desecrated God's holiness, which resides on him. As a servant of God, which is sanctified with the sanctity of Hashem and His holy Torah, require greater holiness and purity than the regular layman, which is not holding on this level. So it's basically a certain level of sanctity that a Jew is meant to have and required to have. And by walking around with this impurity, even for 4 amos, it already breaks that standard, and that's why the Zohar gives such a very severe punishment for one who does so.
What's the story with people who don't, I mean, what do I know, but some people who work in restaurants don't appear to be religious.
That is a great question, and I
Have they
think that
washed their
question
hands
goes
in the
more to
morning?
the touching of food that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Right. So,
And I once heard that since Abraham ben Abraham was put to death, the tumah in the world has greatly decreased, so it's okay to walk to where you wash your hands.
so okay, good. We will touch upon that point.
Who? Since who died?
Okay.
Abraham
When we
ben
come to our conclusion,
Who's
we'll
Abraham
get there.
ben
We'll
Abraham?
get there. When we come to our conclusion of what's the final practical ruling, do we follow the Zohar or not? We'll discuss this.
Well, in general, does halacha go according to Zohar?
Correct. We'll
One of the
discuss
Polish
whatever is
royal
discussed
family
in the
who
place
became a
of
gay
The third
said
restriction.
they hung out with the gra.
Okay, we're gonna,
The third restriction that the Zohar adds is not to speak words of Torah or say God's name. So from the Talmud, you can say Elokai Neshama before washing hands. No
Yes,
problem.
that's why in those days they did.
Yeah. But according to the Zohar, it is prohibited to mention Hashem's name or to learn Torah prior to washing hands. How do we rule? So, in the Alter Rebbe, both in his 2 versions, both in Medur Kama and Medur Basra, it basically rules like the Zohar that one is to be stringent in this. Being that the Zohar is very stringent in this matters, the conclusion there is that every person should take this upon themselves to be stringent. The exact wording there. In the first version, the wording there is that one is to be very careful in this matter. So basically, for Chassidim in general, the adaptation is like the Alter Rebbe's conclusion in arbitration is to be stringent like the Zohar. And indeed, we are very careful in all these listings that we said, whether it be touching clothing, walking 4 amos, or speaking words of Torah and saying blessings. We make sure to wash our hands before doing any of these things. As already mentioned earlier, based on the tradition of the Zusha of Adipali, we actually don't even walk less than 4 amos. We don't even walk at all. We don't put our feet on the floor until we wash. So that's an added stringency to that of the Zohar. The Zusha, he explained it based on that when a person places his feet on the ground, there's a certain grounding that takes place with the epicenter of the earth. I'm using some fancy words. But there's a certain grounding that takes place physically, and so too there's a spiritual grounding that can connect the earth to that impurity, and therefore the tradition we see from him is not even to put the feet on the ground till you wash.
Sounds like they'd be a little dangerous too. Somebody could fall and hurt themselves.
If they stand, at any
No,
time.
if they
of the
don't.
day.
No, if they don't stand. You're saying they can't put their feet on the ground. So they're like kneeling over the bed.
Are you saying they should stand in order to wash?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you learn a little acrobatics of how to wash in the morning without.
Believe me, it's not hard.
What if you wash into a vessel that's not designated for like a negelwasser? Does that vessel become? Are you able to use it for food?
Okay, good question. We'll hold that question. I just want to finish this point.
What happens with the water that spills over onto the floor? Because inevitably it does in my house.
Right. Okay. So, good question. Let's hold those two questions, please. Come back to it as soon as we're done going through the final conclusion. So as I said, we're very careful in this. However, many sects of Jewry are not as careful as we are, as Chassidim are. As I said, in general, all Chassidim, from all the students of the Baal Shem Tov, all the sects are careful in all these Zoharic restrictions, including the Zusha Ani Paili restriction, as we said, not even to put the feet down on the ground. Oh, what I want to mention is it's called rooting. I remember once seeing when I was in Torah Dojo, my karate master, the master of the karate master who was there, so he wanted to show us what rooting is, when you can root yourself to the ground, and he basically, did some kind of meditation while he was standing, and it was as if a tree was in the ground. Nobody was able to push him over. People tried pushing him, he wouldn't move. He couldn't move his feet. It became ground. This is something that Zvani Pali is really saying, that you put your feet on the ground, there's some kind of spiritual rooting that takes place here, and therefore a person should wash even before doing that. But nonetheless, even if someone says, listen, the Zohar, but don't start giving me now other, additional. Okay, it's fine. There's no issur to put your feet on the ground. According to the Zohar, you have 4 amos. Those who are lenient, what do they rely upon? So there's a few different things that the lenient approaches may rely upon. One of them is we have a few poskim. One of them is the El Yerab and the Mesik Eliezer, who qualifies and says, hey, that statement in the name of the Zohar that's brought into Los Yaakov has become extinct. Doesn't apply today. That was for back in the day. Now we don't have that same level of impurity. We don't have the same ruach
You just said that we had worse level of impurity.
Right. So different approaches. And he writes, the Shvus Yaakov writes based on that the custom, he writes the following. Based on this, the custom is for people to at least not be completely lenient against the Zohar, but be lenient to consider one's entire room as 4 amos. There is a logic and approach in Poskim regarding 4 amos that a single room is considered like 4 amos. I'll give an example. An example of that is that a person is not allowed to wear tefillin within 4 amos of a dead body of a corpse. Now, within a single room, the halacha is even if the room is very large and you're more than 6 feet and 4 inches away, you still can't. So based on that idea, in other areas of halacha that we find that a single room is like 4 amos, the Shvus Yaakov, who was a Pesach from 300-400 years ago, writes that the custom has been to be lenient to consider the whole room as 4 amos, and therefore they walk around in the same room before washing hands.
Go to the washroom to wash hands. They don't wash
Right,
in the
so
same
as the
room.
Piskei Teshuvos points out, that's a mistake. That is not correct, and they should not be doing that.
Whoa.
Because that is a complete negation of the words of the Zohar, and taking the leniency of the Tolos of the Shvus Yaakov and the Eli Rabbah to an extent that they never intended.
Yeah, but what if they just hold by the Talmud, not by the Zohar?
I understand, but a person who says, then you would have to then dissect about 1,000 different halachas from the Shulchan Aruch, and a person doesn't have the authority to do that.
No, Rob, let's say it's like a posek.
A posek has to follow the book. He can't make up his own stuff.
Right, but do all the poskim go according to the Zohar also?
And this, as I said, what's written in the poskim is that to the extent of the single room, we do have a leniency that some follow, not Chassidim, but some follow. But past that single room, there is no source to extend that leniency. And since this ruling of the Zohar, as many other rulings of the Zohar, has been accepted amongst Jewry, to one extent or another, therefore, it should be followed at the very least to not just walk around your whole house without washing. You want to be lenient in the same room, you have upon whom to rely. Now for the tradition with the Gra. You have some who say, guys, the whole thing of this impurity, Talmudic, Zoharic, has become obsolete. Why? There was a famous convert, Avram ben Avram, in the times of the Vilna Gaon, that he died, he was killed al Kiddush Hashem by the church, and ever since he died, Bas Melech was sent to exile, no longer goes searching for Jewish bodies.
Wow.
So you can put your fingers in your nose, your ear, your
Oh,
mouth.
so that's where they're holding. So that's where they're
Let's
following.
finish. Let's
But the Litvids
finish.
do wash
She's
knuckle
finishing
boxing.
the story.
So that we're still in the middle of the story. Right? It was Avram the Ger with Count Potatsky. Count
Right.
Potatsky burnt him at the stake.
He was Count Potatsky, no?
Oh, he was Count
Yeah.
Potatsky. Okay. He was Count Potatsky, and he became a Ger Tzedek and was then killed for, I guess, well, it's apostasy.
Right,
The world
within
can
the-
get killed for doing so. Moving from Christianity to Judaism. Okay, so the question is, does this tradition have any verification? I mean, to uproot a Talmudic ruling is extremely difficult. It's not so simple at all. So, if we ask the descendants of the Vilna Gaon, because this tradition is said in the name of the Vilna Gaon, that he's the one who said, after Avram Ager was killed, that now this disparity has left, his own descendants negate this tradition and dismiss it. And they bring that the Vilna Gaon himself, as is written in Maaserav, was extremely careful regarding washing hands in the morning and following all the laws of impurity.
They wash 8 times, it's not 6.
5,
People that follow the girl.
4 in each hand, yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And therefore they conclude, his own descendants conclude, such as Moshe Sternbuch, who's a descendant, son of the Vilna Gaon from Johannesburg. Remember him? Moshe Sternbuch?
Yes, I was so descendant of
Oh,
Really?
wow, that little secret just came out. So have you heard of this tradition?
No.
We have now live testimony, officially deleted.
Delete.
So Rav Moshe Sternbuch, so he's a relative of yours?
No.
But what,
The Vilna
he's from the
Gaon,
Vilna
not,
Gaon.
it must
also-
be. Yeah, I have to check with my
He's
brother.
also from the Vilna Gaon. So
Me
he
too,
writes that
Me too.
on these kind of stories you cannot change halacha, and therefore practically we cannot rely on this story to go ahead and change any of the.
What's his name?
Moshe
Rabbi-
Sternbuch.
Yeah.
He's right now the head chief rabbi of Ve'eda Charedos. He's the rabbi of Ve'eda Charedos.
He was in Hano.
Correct. He is in Harnof, yes. He is in Harnof, but before then he was the chief rabbi of Johannesburg.
Right.
Okay. Two questions that we had before. Remind me, what were the questions?
If you washed into a vessel, it's like a kitchen pot or something.
Right, okay.
that's-
So if you, for whatever reason, don't have a Nagelwasser bucket, or it already happened and you washed into a kitchen pot, what's now the status of that pot? So minadin, it's no worse than something non-kosher entering the pot, and you can just simply wash it clean and go ahead and use it again. So that's from the letter of the law, and that's what's also written in the Butchacher, Beishel Avram, and other Paiskim. However, there is the author of the Mizgaras HaShulchan, he writes something kind of scary, which is how much do we have to follow this is another question, but he writes like this, that majority of the illnesses that come today to people is due to that they use the Nagelwasser buckets for food, even though they clean it in between. So he takes quite a severe
People, I mean, if
approach.
someone bothers to wash Nagelwasser, they actually
To
wash
this.
into a pot.
Well, if you don't have an
Sounds
option.
strange.
I've
No,
gotten
it's
that
not.
question before because they
They
don't
would-
have anything else.
Yeah,
So they
I
wash
mean,
into the sink.
no, because if
They
you're
don't wanna
washing by
walk.
your bed, where
They
you
wanna wash
walk
by
to
their
get
bed.
to
They don't
the
want to
sink.
walk. They follow the Zayar. They're very careful.
You use a pot.
What if you've got a
Yeah.
bathroom attached
I've been
to
in
your
a
bedroom?
state of the
Ah.
house. They didn't have a
If
Nagelwasser
you've got an
bucket,
ensuite
so
bathroom,
that was the
but
only
go in
vessel
there
you could
to
find
wash
in the
your
house.
hands.
That's what we wash
Can you
into.
wash your hands in your bathroom? But again, it would
Yeah, but the
it
garbage
would
sales
entail
were not that
stepping,
type of
getting up. Maybe it's more than 4 cubits. And
that's
if
the
you're
point, right,
not
taking
lenient, like the lenient approach is, you wash
Yeah.
next to your bed. That's the whole reason why we set up Nagelvas. It doesn't say anywhere Shulchan Aruch to set up Nagelvas next to your bed. It's a result of the restriction of not walking 4 amos, plus the restriction of Abzul Sha'anipa not even standing up. So we set it up next to our
Wow.
bed. That's where it comes from.
Can you use a bucket you wash the floor with?
Of course.
Yeah. Now, what you asked if it's spilled, and the answer is that this water is extremely potent. It's impure. It's poisonous, and therefore it's brought down the Shulchan Aruch. The water, you can't use it for anything. You can't use the water to do sponja with. You can't use it to feed to the cat or something.
But after it dries, it's like, it's fine.
100%. So dry it.
You can't water your
You don't need to
plant.
wash the floor
Unless
three
you don't like
times or
those plants.
something. Just checking.
What do you dry it with?
I keep a towel on the floor next to the bed.
Especially for that purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we dry the
Because
water.
I am clumsy.
Basmala.
I do when I wake up, yeah.
What's the question?
The basmala
Yeah.
term. We hear it as women all the time.
Right.
As you're the basmala.
Right.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
all to hear
Men also have a little bit of basmala.
But that's the really evil stuff.
Listen, everything in listen, your question is not a question for me, it's a question for Adam Arishan. When Adam and Eve, let's not leave Adam as the only point to blame here, as I explained in my class, the lecture that we did on Wednesday night, when Adam and Chava ate from the fruit from the tree of good and evil, they made a corresponding level of evil for all the levels of Kedusha. So, that's where it started.
So
the
basmala
basmala
has
of
both
evil.
sides.
Yes.
Okay, so basically if you wake up in the middle of the night, you need to wash Negelwasser.
Okay, so that's a statement, but I will take that as a question so I can answer it.
So that was obviously a question.
So the question is as follows. You wake up in the middle of the night, we follow this Zoharic restriction, as we said, we try to follow it. We don't walk even 4 cubits, we don't put our feet on it. But we're half asleep, we almost tumbling out of bed, and we're still in that half sleeping stage. Do you have to wash when you're just having a momentary break, bathroom break, and then returning to bed to sleep? So one thing's for certain, if it's already past Aleis HaShachar, which sometimes could be, it still looks like night outside, but official Aleis HaShachar has already arrived, which is anywhere between 120 and 72 fluctuating minutes
Wow,
before sunrise. So now sunrise is 6:40, so that could be about 4 o'clock or 4:30. For sure you need to wash before you walk anywhere, unless you anyways follow those, the leniencies against the Zayhar, or, as I said, 1 room is 4 hours. However, if it's before, let's say it's 12 o'clock at night, or 1:30 at night, etc., it's certainly before Aleis HaShachar, so ideally you would have to wash, but there is a tradition recorded in the Eshel Avram, the name of his father-in-law, that in such a case, the tumah doesn't yet come, it only comes, he basically says like this, the tumah only goes to the fingers when it's your official time to start your day. But when he knows this kid, this guy or this girl is going back to sleep in 3 minutes, he's not going anywhere. He knows that he doesn't have to vacate. He knows another 3 minutes and the Nefesh of the Kiss is going to leave again. So he stays put. He doesn't pack up. What's it going to help to wash your hands?
But you're seriously going to check your watch and start calculating if it's Aleis HaShachar?
But if you wake up at 2 in the morning, there's no question
But
of
that's
it being Aleis
true.
HaShachar. If you
But
wake up
if
at 4,
I
there's
wake
no
up at 2 in the
question.
morning, I'm not going to be...
But what's the
Able to
difference if
figure
you
it out.
wash your hands? I mean, it's not harmful, so,
So
why
he
don't you
says,
just wash your hands?
so he says that you can just go straight to the bathroom and go back. Or he even says you have, well, let's say a different example.
Actually, for nursing the baby, that's good.
Let's give a different example. Okay, nursing the baby is another example. In the middle of the night, another example is you have a really terrible itch in your ear. I'm not in the mood of doing now this whole process, getting my hands wet, washing my hands, drying them.
Drops out.
All I do is I have a simple itch which is bothering me. So if it's an itch on your arm, we already said there's no problem, go ahead. But if it's an itch in an orifice, it's a problem.
Can you use a
So
pencil?
he says in that case, what?
Throw it out?
1 second. So he says in that case, you can be lenient. You can go ahead practically. The best thing is to be stringent, to wash the hands beforehand. But those who are lenient before Alois have upon whom to rely. There's a room for leniency here in such a situation. And the best situation to circumvent the discussion is to simply use a vessel, which will get me back to a question I was asked for that I never directly answered, which is, based on the restrictions we listed, we can understand that anything not on that list is unrestricted. So a cell phone is not on the list. A kli is not on the list. Only clothing, and that's only according to the Zayhar. But certainly, I'm allowed to turn my cell phone on to see what time it is, or grab my glasses before I wash hands.
Or shoes. Slippers.
No,
Shoes, clothing. Clothing is a
Can
problem.
constitute clothing.
Shoes or slippers or clothes?
Perhaps they are.
Clothes the
So
body.
you're allowed to
clothes
touch your
the feet.
blankets, move your blankets.
Right.
Not, blankets are not clothing.
Touching
She's
yourself?
blankets.
So
Sometimes with your
obviously,
Just put
we
your
are not
feet
going to
in.
restrict someone from putting their blankets on
Where
their
they
body. You know.
Or just taking it off to go wash. I mean, you're
Right,
to move
100%. Is it considered clothing? Again, the statements don't begin dissecting the definition of clothing and what is in it. What I can tell you from common sense is that I think, you know, it would be a very big stringency to tell someone your hands are locked once you fall asleep and you can't move your blankets anymore. It would be kind of difficult.
Yeah, but
Especially
you
when
can't touch
you're
your
sleeping
pajamas
with
while you're
somebody.
sleeping.
I said
And you,
clothing
like,
you are wearing,
No, right.
there is a stronger side to say that that's not included in the Zaharic restriction. It's only
Just-
clothing that you're not wearing that you want to put on.
The question you asked.
Clothing that you want to put on.
No,
So
clothing that you're not wearing, but they're clothing that need to be, that are
So
worn.
what does that have to do with the baby's clothing?
I said before, that's why I said earlier that perhaps the baby's clothing, she's wearing them, or he's wearing them, it wouldn't count, it wouldn't be about, I said that, I mentioned that.
Oh, I hear.
Just the question asked earlier about somebody who's Jewish who didn't wash their hands working in a
Okay,
restaurant.
very good, so let's conclude with that question. But first I want to answer her question. You asked about the coffee excitement once you wake up.
Oh yeah, the kumkum.
So you want to touch the kumkum the first thing. It's
Yeah.
like you touch it and then you go to the Nagelwasser?
Yeah.
It just helps you
I
wake
don't
up.
know why.
Alright, okay, it helps people wake up. So the answer is it's not a problem because the kumkum is an external vessel.
Oh,
It is
great.
not the actual, I'm not touching the food. I am not touching the clothing. It doesn't, if it doesn't fall on the list, it's not a problem.
Sounds
I once had a roommate who was very stringent and obviously not very well versed in the laws, who refused to ever shut off his alarm until he finished washing.
Oh boy.
Oh!
That was just an excuse.
Ouch.
Why? I don't touch my phone. I don't want the tumult to come to my phone.
Crazy.
Whoa. I hope he got up quickly.
No, probably
Not
not.
always. Not always. Anyways, okay, so let's now, last question for today, which both of you asked regarding what do we do about Jewish workers. So non-Jewish workers, no tumah, not a problem. Jewish workers are non-observant, so a number of poskim discuss this. We have already thrown out any reliance on this tradition of Avram ben Avraham. It's live right here. This is recorded in history, what just happened today. We have a live negation of this tradition from a descendant, which already, as I said, many descendants have already negated it anyways. So we can't rely on that. So is there anything to rely upon? So first, number one, because of that, a real Mahadran Hashkacha will place a Mashgiach or somebody with the position of making sure that the Jewish non-observant workers do Nagelwasser before they enter the factory. That is the official policy of the Eidachedus and Rav Landa.
Oh.
And therefore they do not touch the produce until they wash hands. Now, is
Rav
this
Lando
foolproof?
as opposed to Agudas Yisrael.
I cannot speak
etc.
for them. I do know that Rav Landa and the Eidachedus do implement this.
That's interesting.
I do not know if the other Mahadran Hashkachas do or do not. I don't know. But this is, again, this question was discussed already in the Poskim from 100 years ago, and different approaches have been taken. Some say for this reason to try to wash the fruits and vegetables, the produce. It's only produce. I mean, if they're moving, anything that has a wrapping is not a problem.
Well, we're talking about restaurants.
Raw, right, or in a restaurant, raw produce or restaurant. Okay, so then to do Nagelwasser to it, like you bought apples from a non-religious seller, so you would wash it 3
Do
times
Nagelwasser
without a
to it.
bracha.
Like rice and chicken
Apples
on our-
don't
Kids
do
like
a
to
seder
touch
bracha
things,
Right.
but
without a bracha. Another approach is to rely on the fact that since today many people, they wake up, they turn on the sink, they wash their hands, even if on a 10 different Nagelwasser, that the informal, not following the detailed washing, nonetheless has the power to remove some of the impurity. Rich, we'll touch upon this more next week.
Thank you.
Do you remember that story? One of the rabbis was showing how the son was. He brought someone in and he was sleeping and picked off his ear.
Right.
And in his sleep he put his finger into a handkerchief.
You want to switch it off, you've got to ask the
That was the point he was making to show him even in his
knows how to
sleep.
use it?
He was touching his ear with his cold
I heard
his
this. I
finger.
heard that story when we read the Riyadh regarding the Yama.
I'm going to show you how.
Really?
You know where the source of the story is?
I don't remember, but
If you can find me a source, it's a great story. I'll put it in the notes.